useful, published by a very conservative, not very, but a conservative press, Harvard University Press, it just might attract some attention, in which case I anticipated I'd be asked to appear before legislative committees and courts and so forth. And so I made a resolve. I wanted to try this, but I was going to wait 2 years from the date of its publication before I did that. And I kept that resolve. And then, 2 years later, at a party in Cambridge, I had my wife and I had our first experience with cannabis. We were the only ones in the group who hadn't smoked it up till then.
Tell me quickly, describe that first personal experience and how it made you feel.
Well, it was a very strange one. I became very anxious, which one can when one first uses marijuana. If you take more than you should, then you
Surely.
don't have...
Especially when you know that it's illegal.
Yeah, right. And set and setting, that's exactly right. And I was so anxious, and I drove home, and I got my wife said to me in the car, "Look at Lester, you wrote in your book, it takes people a number of times." And the anxiety was pinned to the idea that I was fraudulent. I had written a fraudulent book. It was a placebo. Nothing happened. Everybody else stopped smoking and said they had enough. Betsy and I asked her anything. She said, I don't feel a thing. I said, neither do I. And I became anxious because I thought I had done something terrible here. I was deceiving a lot of people. Well, it was years later I realized I had an anxiety high. I mean, and it wasn't, and she said in the car, "Look at, this Carl Sagan, our friend, said he didn't get high until his 6th try." And why do you believe what you understand to be true? But she couldn't talk me down from this. And finally, next week we tried it again. Nothing happened. But on the third occasion, we got a high, and we loved it.
And never looked back. Something that we all agree on here listening to the show, I'm sure, is that cannabis is medicine and that there is a need for easier access. The saddest thing to me is that people are afraid that it's only not safe or therapeutic, but they're even brainwashed into fearing the plant itself and the stigma associated with it so much that they'll actually deny themselves relief. And in the past, you've been quoted as saying that cannabis truly is the people's medicine, and it is, quote, the wonder drug of modern ages. Have you ever seen marijuana do harm to anyone who has tried it for medicinal purposes?
No. I've seen some young people who become so stuck on it that they use it as an excuse for not trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives. But that's another matter. That may be, they may be into something else, something more dangerous like alcohol. But I've never seen anybody harmed in the least by using it as a medicine, or for that matter, pretty much anybody use it in any way. You see, there are three. I knew when I went into it that it was a recreational, when I first got into a recreational drug, and I soon learned a lot about medicine and wrote the book on that, so that was the second use. But it's really comes largely through my own personal use that I have described a third broad category, and they're somewhat conflated categories of use, and that is enhancement of human capacities. Now, everybody knows if you eat something while you're high on cannabis, it may be an ordinary food, but it sure does taste like a culinary treat. That's an enhancement that comes.
That's the best fast food burger I've ever eaten.
Exactly. And one could say something quite parallel to that about the sexual experience. But there are other enhancements.
Absolutely.
Like, in fact, Carl used it. For example, we were together one night and smoking, and he knew people send me gifts from California, and I received some neatly rolled joints from someone in California. but I would enjoy this. I took him in, and we did. And I had 2 or 3 of them left, and I had my little container. And when I left, he said, Lester, I have to finish the last chapter for, I can't remember which book, tomorrow, and I wonder if you could let me take that joint. He used it for enhancement, for writing his books. Lots of artists do. Lots of people use it as a way of seeing around corners they ordinarily don't see. So I think that's an overlook, but it will become more prominent in the future, the enhancement of a variety of human experiences.
I agree totally. I liken it a little bit to the effect of, like, you're at a train station and you're set to pick somebody up, and you know that it's a man or a woman and they have dark hair or light hair, and the train opens up and hundreds of people get off the train, and your brain instantly factors out all of the people that don't meet that criteria. And I find that what cannabis does for me is it kind of filters out a lot more of the background information or the static noise, and helps me to focus on what it is that I'm trying to accomplish at the present moment, whether it be physical or mental. It's just a wonderful medicine.
Yeah, it is, but it's also more than a medicine. That gets beyond medicine, and recreation is outside of medicine. So there are these 3 big categories, and it makes one so angry about this prohibition. It's one that goes back almost 80 years to the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. And, I think eventually some social historian is going to look back on this time, who knows, sometime in the future, and say, what in the world was this mass delusion all about? And how was it sustained so long? And how is it that people put up with all the damage that was doing, particularly the young people? They were more concerned about, the damage they thought that cannabis would do to their young ones.
Sure.
Yeah, well,
and the damage done by so many other legal substances is so much greater. This is such an interesting conversation. I'm sorry that we have to break again, but guess what, everybody? We're coming back with a 3rd segment. We're going to put the Ask Kyle off until next week, and we're going to come back and talk some more with Dr. Lester Grinspoon after our break for our sponsors. We'll be right back.
The Grow Show with Kyle Cushman will return once we cultivate through this short commercial break.
Your connection to quality cannabis insurance services is spelled K-A-E-R-C-H-E-R. That's Karcher Insurance. We have worked with ventures like cannabis for over 60 years. We're proud to represent over 50 companies with tailor-made cannabis plans for owners just like you to insure your product, your plants, and your pursuits. K-A-E-R-C-H-E-R spells out their full-service insurance services, ranging from commercial to bonds to personal, from life to health, and more. Contact the team at KarcherInsurance.com and let our experience work for you. That's K-A-E-R-C-H-E-R Insurance.com.
Contact Karen and the team at Karcher Insurance at 1-844-421-3560. That's 844-421-3560.
MJWellness.com, the largest medical marijuana community in the world. Connect with thousands of patients, doctors, industry leaders, and businesses through shared personal experiences along our worldwide network. Discover new therapies and benefits with content tailored to you. Come grow your network on MJWellness.com. You're not alone. Your wellness matters. Learn, live, and thrive. Check out MJWellness.com today.
From high atop Mount Soledad in San Diego, California, 100 feet above sea level. Good morning. It's good news with cannabis nurse Heather.
This plant is amazing. Positive change is happening. We did it. No matter who you are, you can make a positive impact on the world.
I would rather be illegally alive than legally dead.
And that quote helped to give you strength.
Nurse Heather is only on CannabisRadio.com.
Good morning, cannabis nurse Heather.
Time to plant some more conversational seeds. You're listening to The Grow Show with Kyle Cushman, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome back, everybody. This is usually where we go to our Ask Kyle segment, where I answer your questions about growing great cannabis. But today, we're going to extend our interview with Dr. Grinspoon, but Ask Kyle will be back next week. We've been lucky enough to experience a period of growth with respect to human rights issues. One example is the progression of cannabis reform in this country. Another is that our friends from the LGBT community are finally allowed to marry the person they love. However, we still have some big bridges to cross. We recently saw the disappearance of Confederate flags from public property. Racism is still undeniably simmers under the surface. Police brutality is out of control, and school shootings barely even make the news anymore. Last week, there was a shooting at Northern Arizona University. My producer's daughter actually goes to school there. And gun control, drug decriminalization, pay inequality, criminal justice reform, all these issues, a woman's right to choose. Could you give me a synopsis? Where do you see us going with these issues of the times right now in the next 10 years?
Well, you mean not just the cannabis issue, but the ones you mentioned. Well, I think we're, this summary is that you are able to summarize now those issues and that they are being reviewed. We have to do something about all of these things that you mentioned. Other people have taken on these other issues, and that's great, and I hope more people do. I will continue, now that I'm emeritus, I spend most of my time with this thing on marijuana. At one time, the book came out in 1971, and by the time the 80s and 90s came along, I despaired that I would ever see the overthrow of this terribly destructive prohibition in my lifetime. But I'm so glad to see what's going on now, because not only are people getting close, in 23 states it's approved medically, and 4 of them it's completely free of the prohibition, and that is just going on state by state, and that's wonderful. Gives us a bunch of state experiments for other states to see what form they want it to take. But the point is, the prohibition is falling. The cat is out of the bag, and it will never be put in that bag again. And the way to ensure that it isn't put in the bag again is for people to keep in mind and even practice, if you can grow your own, one, because you're afraid a government sometime in the future will change its mind about this, or because the people who are selling it are becoming greedy and it's too expensive. Grow your own. And that's the way. Nothing can get in the way of our being able to freely use. This drug is not the terrible pestilence that I thought it was when I started. It is a blessing, and we should...
Cheers to that. Absolutely, and that's why the name of my show is The Grow Show. And I've spent my career trying to help people learn how to cultivate their own medicine legally and through compliance. I have a couple of questions here I think you might enjoy here to finish out our last segment. So what would you mandate if you were appointed the new U.S. drug czar?
I would mandate a federal walking back of the prohibition. Take it out of Schedule 1. It's just no longer to be it can be regulated. It should be regulated like alcohol, but it mustn't be prohibited. It should be regulated, and the regulations should be reasonable. That's what I would want. Just get out of it altogether.
I'm now officially nominating Dr. Lester Grinspoon for the U.S. drug czar, and if anybody would like to start up a campaign, we'll get you elected on the internet. Do you think that any of the current U.S. presidential candidates have what you would consider to be a common-sense approach to drug law reform?
Well, frankly, I think Bernie Sanders is probably the closest to anybody who's talking about the real issues that face us.
Hear, hear.
He's a realist. I don't think he knows much about cannabis at this time, but he's a very smart man, and he has a good hold of the reality. The reality is this prohibition is a disaster, and even now the government is freeing some of the people they put in jail on account of this. But this is a man, he's the one candidate I would have confidence in who would say, hey, I'm for getting rid of this prohibition. It was a big mistake. We have to live with the fact that we've done this, but we've got to stop doing it. It's over.
Man, yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. You know,